everybody, Manning from Strong Data Sheets here. Today I'm going to be going over the percentage drop formula that I've created that allows us to auto-regulate those back offsets based on whether the lifter overshoots or undershoots their top set. The reason that this has kind of come about is that when we're prescribing a percentage drop from a top set, obviously the weight is determined by whatever the lifter chooses for that top set. The problem we can kind of run into is if that person overshoots that top set, these back offs are going to be dragged up as well. Or if there's an undershoot, these back offs are going to be depressed. Now, you might say, well, why don't you just actually give them RPE targets for these back offs to kind of alleviate that problem? The reason that I think myself and a lot of coaches like just using a percentage drop is because it's just kind of simple. It allows the lifter to hit that top set, be told what to do for those back offs, and just focus on the movements itself rather than second guessing themselves as to what that 5 RPE set looks like for those back offs. And the second reason is that within powerlifting, we're seeing the prevalence of really sub-maximal volume, right? A lot of coaches you'll see will prescribe this maybe top set as being a little bit more intense and then drop off by a significant amount so that these back off sets end up being around that 3 to 4 RPE range. And, how do you tell a lifter, hey, hit a 3 to 4 RPE? It's just something that they're not able to really perceive. It just has to be kind of a prescribed weight. So with that being the reasons that I kind of like using a percentage drop-off, let's just make a simple one. So if we say that this lifter hits 132.5 kilos at a 7 RPE on this day, so that they have hit the RPE that we wanted them to. To create this formula, we would simply say this times what should be 0.925. However, to make it a general formula so that no matter what is in this box, we would just take that percentage plus 1. Okay. No. Oh, that's why. Now we're at. Okay. So now we've got these, 122.6 number, which obviously is not something that we're going to use in powerlifting. So we use what's called the M round formula, so that we put M round and then we tell Google Sheets what we want it to round by, which in our case is 2.5 if we're working in kilos. Okay, and now we've got this 122 kilos that they're going to use for all of these sets. Now, when we're prescribing this 7.5%, right? Why did I use 7.5% and not, 2% or 10%? Well, it's because I want to push that lifter into a particular intensity zone, a particular percentage of their 1 rep max. And we're going to go through this data sheet, which shows us where that's going to end up. So what this sheet does is that obviously we know that if a lifter does a single rep at 10 RPE, that is 100% of their 1 rep. But it goes through and lays out the percentages for this entire rep range and 10 to 5 RPE, right? So we can look up that a 6 at 7 RPE is this 76.2%. Okay, so timesing it by that 0.925 ends up at this 70% or 70.5% back offs. So where does coming down the 6 rep column, we can see that they're going to somewhere be around maybe this 4.5 RPE, right? Now, depending on the lifter, it may well be that doing this top set has kind of made them somewhat fatigued from that top set, meaning that it's not actually going to line up perfectly with this 4 RPE that they theoretically should hit. It may well be that it's actually more like a 5. But a 5 is obviously not too exertive. So it's likely that the next set, they will receive a slight drop, 5.5, and then the next set might be a 6, right? So as a coach, this is what I wanted. I wanted this volume to be quite submaximal. It averages out at about 5.5 RPE, so something that they can easily recover from. And they've got the volume in that I wanted them to get in, leading into their next bench session. I'm going to take this and just use it as a reference and dump it in week 2. Oh, I've already done that. No worries. Now, let's take the example of when they overshoot. Let's imagine that they get a little bit excited and they overshoot by 1.5 RPE. So not out of the realms of possibility, right? If I saw that on a spreadsheet, it's not that they're deliberately overshooting, it's more that, they just kind of stuffed up a bit. Okay. Because this formula is based entirely on the load that they used and doesn't take into account for the RPE, we can see that this is going to be a lot heavier. Remembering that 132.5 kilos led to that 7 RPE, this 130 should theoretically either be a 7, oh, that's not good, is either going to be a 7, but likely higher. And it's likely going to be higher because this set is going to generate a lot more fatigue than that 7 did. But we'll go back to our data sheet and we'll kind of show exactly where it'll sit. So instead of being this 76.2 number, this 8.5 is 79.9. So now we can see that these back-offs are sitting around the 73.9% range, which again, if we go down this column, is exactly a 6, right? However, again, I don't think it's going to be there. I think it's going to more likely start at least a 7. So if they start this at about a 7 RPE, the next set is likely going to be an 8, and then I wouldn't be surprised if they end up at something like a 9 for that last set. And so we can see that I intended for this to be quite submaximal, and when they hit that number perfectly, it was. However, in this case, this is going to be quite exertive. They're going to take that fatigue into that next session, and over time, and this is just not what I wanted. This is not what I programmed. I'll cop it when I write in a program a certain protocol. They do that protocol and it doesn't work. However, if they come into their next bench session and it feels like shit, has been caused by this overshoot, which has bled into all of these back offsets, and then I can't really reliably tell you whether, if they had done what I wanted them to do, whether my program as a whole is working, and that's obviously a problem for us coaches. So, in terms of how we want to correct that, I'll just say that, 2 things, right? I'm not actually worried about a set here or there being overshot or undershot, right? Realistically, on any given day, there's going to be a couple of sets which, some of them are going to be slightly over, some of them are going to be slightly under. If I, as a coach, look at the end of a program and say, week 2 on your secondary bench, I programmed a 5, but you did a 6.5 on that one set, and that's why your bench is stalled. I mean, it's obviously pretty ridiculous. So that I'm not worried about the accumulation of fatigue from that one set. The second thing that this is also not trying to do is that I'm not trying to factor in the fatigue of that set and then down-regulate these back offsets, right? So that if I was to say, right, if a person overshoots by 1.5, then I need to drop these back offs instead of like by 7%, it should be dropped by 9%. I'm not really basing that off anything kind of clear and methodical, right? And all right, I would also kind of look at things like, all right, if somebody did a 5 and they did a 6, was prescribed a 5 and they did a 6, have they actually generated that much more fatigue? Whereas if they were intended to do an 8 and they actually did a 9, there's probably a bigger accumulation in fatigue, or at least I think, right? So that we're not worried about any of that because there's just not a clear way of dealing with it. All I'm trying to do is make sure that these back offsets are the intensity that I intended. And we're just not going to worry about this. So this 140 at 8.5, they're just going to have to deal with it. What I do want to ensure is that these back offsets are at that 122.5 that I prescribed, which, if we remember back, correlates to 70.5%. Okay, so how are we going to find that? We're going to use this estimated 1RM because regardless of whether they did 132.5 or they did this 140, this estimated 1RM is going to be within, a couple of points the same. So that is the constant which we are now using. So in order to find that 122.5 number, we need to find what I'm going to call the hindsight load. So we know that they should have done 132.5 for it to be a 7, and we need to work backwards to find that. So in this case, on this data set, we already know that they should have done 76.2% of their estimated 1RM to hit that 6 at 7. The estimated 1RM, so it is 175.22. Okay, the prescribed percentage is the next thing that I want to find. So you might say, well, you never prescribed a percentage. I did though, right? And all coaches, whether they realize it or not, are. Regardless of whether a person works in percentages or RPE, you are prescribing the other, right? So when a coach puts down, a set of 5 at 75%, we know that they're actually going to be working at this 6 to 5.5% RPE. So even if you are a coach that works in percentages, they're still mindful of the rough RPE that they're getting that person to do on that day. So the prescribed percentage is this 76.2 number. RPE of 7 for 6 reps. Is this number. The load drop multiplier we know is, again, this plus 1. And so to find that hindsight load, to find that 132.5 kilos, it's as simple as equals this times this. Okay. And when we do the M round at the end, we'll end up with that. And then the back off load is simply this times this. And then using that M round, voila. Okay, so that's all quite simple. I hope that everybody kind of understands that. We know that their estimated 1RM, regardless of what they loaded on that day, the estimated 1RM is their strength for that day. So it's a constant. at least for that day, right? The prescribed percentage, we've worked with knowing the RPE and knowing the reps that they're going to do, we can derive this number from that sheet, and we're taking off 7.5%. So I'm just going to write this out in a formula so that we just have it for reference. Back offs equal estimated 1RM times prescribed percentage times the load drop multiplier. Okay. So now that we've got the maths worked out, we need to go into the back end of Google Sheets to make our formula work. So I'm just going to put this, I'm just going to leave this here so that we've kind of got it for reference. And we'll work on it. So the box where the estimated 1RM sits, so that's simple enough. The prescribed percentage. Now, in Google Sheets, there's a thing called VLOOKUP. So that is the function which is going into this data sheet and finding on these columns the reps and finding in these rows the RPE and then arriving at this number. I don't have time to kind of go over how it works. In fact, one video that you should look at, I think Bryce Lewis probably did it 10 years ago now, but it was back in on the days when people were still using Excel. But it's basically an explanation of how to use VLOOKUP and use this sheet to actually find this estimated 1RM number, something which is very useful when we're tracking somebody's progress. All I'm going to do is you're just going to have to believe me when I say, no, come on. You're just going to have to believe me that it is this. Times VLOOKUP, and then again, we're also going to times by that load drop multiplier, which is this cell plus 1. Okay, closing out, we get to here, and then again, I'm going to use that mRound formula to round to 5. Okay, and so now we've arrived at our answer. And to prove that this is what I say that it is, getting rid of these, you should also use if error as well so that you get rid of these. I actually, in my sheet, you might be wondering, oh, why do you have all of these errors here? I actually don't want my lifters to see any of that. I don't want them to obsess over their estimated one every day, so I actually have it hidden. So that's why I've never bothered to put if error statements in all of these formulas. But for something like this, to make sure that the sheet doesn't look ugly, you add in if error, no, if error, I want you to do blank. That was a side quest. As they've hit it correctly, and even if they undershoot, so let's say they did 127.5 and hit that as a 6 RPE, it again arrives at the same number. So I hope that you found this useful. Please let me know if you've got any questions and just plug them into the comments. Hope that this has obviously been useful, and if you ever get stuck, use ChatGPT.